press the recording. Excellent. So hello everybody and welcome to our kickoff session for week 2 in our teacher trainer coach. And what we will be focusing on in this week is how to develop intercultural competence. And just see there's an N too many, wonderful, as a business English trainer. And while we are starting, can I just ask you, Sue, to put in the first poll, which is, do you already include intercultural components? Maybe make that a bit bigger. Intercultural components in your teaching. Could you please click if you do that? Okay, yes, all the time. Yes, sometimes. Yes, rarely. Okay. But we don't have anybody who doesn't do that at all, at least not of the people who are here. Okay. Good. Okay. Then we have some more poll questions. I think everybody answered that. Which is, how important is intercultural competence for BE trainers? So can we have that? Thank you. What would you say? Okay, so everybody would say, or most people would say, I think that's nearly everybody, most people would say it's very important or it's even essential. Good. Okay. And then we come to our third question. Do your students or clients expect you to teach intercultural aspects in your BE classes? That's quite a different picture here, isn't it? Yeah, so no or yes, some. Okay. Okay, good. And the other question is then, of course, but that's something we don't have a poll for. Do you charge extra when you include intercultural aspects? So, and the reason why I asked this question is actually that we are going to kick off with a bit of my personal story into this combined training of intercultural competence and business English that I actually focus on. So we come back to that question. Good. So what I often start with in my courses when I deal with this aspect of intercultural competence in business English is that I ask people for this definition of culture, language, business, and communication. And so we did this already a bit in the chat box, so you can have can have a look at that. My other question would be, what is the connection between these four? So could you put your ideas? We changed the question slightly. Could you put your ideas? What is the connection between these four? I think some people already were in that direction. Okay, it's now it's working for good. So you don't charge extra. Well, maybe you should, or at least you should charge more because you offer actually additional value. But we come to that later. Yes, Anastasia, I would say that is spot on. Thank you very much. To communicate successfully in business, you need to know the language and you need to know the culture. Language and culture are quite inseparable, or at least they influence each other very, very strongly. And yes, they all can cause problems in the business communication. Good. Thanks, Sue. Okay, good. Because the point is that what we often see is that when we have misunderstandings, when people use English as a lingua franca in international business, they're influenced by their own background, by their own culture, that shapes how they use the language. And when a misunderstanding occurs, we never know, is it linguistic? Is it a communication styles? Is it a cultural thing? And that is actually one of the key issues why we as business English trainers do need intercultural competence. So we go to the next slide, and as I said, I'm going to share a little story with you how I ended up in this. I read English literature and cultural studies and media studies at university, and when I started business English training, then things were a bit different than they are now. And actually, the interesting thing was I was teaching for a huge German company in my hometown of Bochum, and they were taken over by a British company. And so the German management thought, oh, it's quite a good idea. We should provide some intercultural training to our employees, 2002. Now, my question to you is, what do you think was included in that training 15 years ago? So, German company taking over by a British parent, getting your parent, what do you think they included in the training? Yes, country specifics. Do's and don'ts. English breakfast, customs and traditions, social conduct. Okay. Business specifics, stereotypes. Well, let me show you. So they did actually some kind of country briefing, and two of the major topics were this. So they had a case study of English football, which is a very sore topic when you think about Germany and England, looking at the history, and they talked about the Queen. So this company that took over the German company is a multinational. It's a global multinational. How useful do you think were these things, knowing about the Queen, the British Parliament, Tony Blair, and, for example, English football? What do you think? How successful was that kind of training? No. How to deal with Germans? Yeah, this is something actually they should have told the British. Yeah. So not at all. Actually, the football was quite bad. But well, maybe useful to some extent, but not really, because that was not the kind of business situations my students were facing. None of them went to the UK to work there on a secondment or something like this. This is where I think country briefing makes sense, but most of them worked now with international teams, with their colleagues all over the world, and knowing that we have Queen Elizabeth II didn't really help. Yeah, so maybe manners, yeah, so or something that's like small talk would actually help. Well, the thing was that I taught business English to that company, and the stuff that I did in my business English courses was more helpful and rather built their intercultural competence than what the so-called intercultural training provided. So we were actually quite shocked by that. So the attitude that it revealed was we have on the one hand language training, on the other intercultural training, and they are something completely opposite. They're not compatible and quite a different pair of shoes. Fortunately, this has changed now, so my clients now understand that they need to learn about intercultural things as well and intercultural aspects, but this is what they had here. So the general attitude that we are often facing still in business English is it's enough to provide English language training, yeah, to really stick to linguistic problems, to grammar and vocabulary. Intercultural training isn't really needed because if we speak English, we can do business all over the world. And any difficulties or misunderstandings are purely language related. My English isn't good enough or their English isn't good enough. So as you can guess, I totally disagree. So, and this is my next question. So these are the situations that my students were facing. And while I take you through them, please put in what kind of situations are your students facing that require intercultural competence from them. So my students were facing telephone conferences, audio conferences with Americans and Chinese people. They had to make small talk. And the stereotype is that Germans are not particularly good at small talk. They had to read long and cryptic emails that they didn't understand, especially from the English colleagues. They get no reply to their very short and to the point emails. They were the only ones who were prepared in meetings because they read the 56 slides PowerPoint presentation beforehand. They were asked in meetings, how do you feel about it? This is something the Germans don't really think makes any sense in business. They had very long meetings without any result. And they were also quite surprised by the low attention span in presentations. So, okay, so what are your experiences there? Online calls with customer and colleagues in other locations? Yes, Evelyn, I think that's a very important thing. Email exchanges to coordinate project work. Mixed culture teams in weekly discussion groups. Oh, I can imagine that is also a challenge. Talking in telephone conferences. Yeah, meetings. Yeah, so communicative strategies for meetings, video calls. Yeah, business trips. Yes, and frustration when decisions are revisited to actually understanding the function of a decision. Is the decision the end to something, or is the decision of the beginning of something? Yeah, so like when you negotiate a contract, for example, work lunch, not talking, status reports. Okay. Yes, prefer to write things, get things in writing, negotiate. Yes, negotiate meanings is actually also something because, as I said, we all use English, but we use English in different ways. And this is where understanding or misunderstanding can occur. Listening, yes, that's a very important skill, Julie. Yeah. Or presenting reports, for example. Good. So what we are going to do in the first part of this is actually that we look a bit into the kind of situations where we need to build intercultural competence with our learners. And in the second part, we're going to look at some examples and activities that you can actually do in the classroom, and that will also help with the tasks that I've prepared for our week. Yes. So we come to that, Michael, believe me. Okay, so in our case, I have, with my client that I was talking about earlier, they outsourced a lot of the chores, like basic bookkeeping, some IT chores, and so on, to other countries, to Portugal, to Poland, and in particular to India. And these are things where we have the outsourcing to India, and these were the communication problems that my students had. So the Indians speak word perfect English, but the Germans don't understand them because they are not really familiar with the accent. And usually their opinion is then that the Indian English is very poor, which is of course not true. The Germans were also very upset by the different use of names. So that like they were often addressed as Dear Schmitz instead of Dear Sebastian or Dear Mr. Schmitz. They were also upset by the fact that they didn't get any reply to emails, and they didn't understand the different meaning of yes. So in German, when you say yes, then it means yes, I know what to do, for example, if I show you something on the computer. And in other parts, in other cultures, it could just mean yes, I'm listening, yes, I'm following, and not yes, I know what to do, or yes, I agree. So that is actually yeah, yes, but is always a no. Yeah, but this is the kind of things that happen. And what do you think, the four situations here, what is the reason of this? Is that language? Is that culture? Is it communication? Business manners? What would you say? What's behind those misunderstandings? Language or culture? Semantics, yeah, bit of all. Mm-hmm. For example, indirect versus direct style of communications. And we have definitely here direct style of communication versus indirect. For example, in the emails. Mm-hmm. Culture more than language. Lack of exposure. So the first one is clearly a linguistic problem. But the interesting thing is that the German interpretation of this is actually a cultural problem. The Indians don't speak good English. Yeah? Instead of saying, oh, we are not familiar with their accent, we need more exposure, which is what I give them, of course, in the teaching. High and low context, yeah, pragmatic understanding, culture of hierarchy, for example, yeah. So you see, actually, it's a big web, it's a big mix. And as an English or business English teacher, I have to start helping my students understand what exactly occurs or what goes wrong in their communication with others. So, and this is exactly where I see the problem for us. We have what I call the business talk cocktail. You have language and you have culture, and both are huge influencing factors on our communication. And we have to build awareness for ourselves, and also awareness, of course, for our students that they are able to handle those situations better and instead of just like relying on stereotypes. Yes, Michael, I think that's also something. So, for example, with the English colleagues, they often didn't understand them because of high context. We come to that later, but also because they often used specific, say, Scottish or Northern English jargon. And with a school English background in Germany, you haven't got a clue what these people are talking about. Yeah, and this is the same when you have Germans who translate their own words into English and give them a totally different meaning. Yeah, not just talking about false friends, but also talking about idioms. And I think that is something for like nearly every other language as well. So you actually take over special language functions and culture functions into the way you use ELF, English as lingua franca in international business. Yep. So, okay. And let's go on. Another thing that we have to be aware of is, of course, the culture trap. This is something that's quite important for the first task that you're going to deal with, which is the interpretation and analysis of some videos on that topic. We tend to think in stereotypes, but the problem is that stereotypes can very often be misleading. Stereotypes help to organize or to understand a group or to understand certain behavior, yes. But if you meet an individual from a certain culture and you can't see beyond the stereotype, you have a problem because maybe you put that person to the wrong category. So you need to remember that we deal with individuals. And for that, we need not only intercultural skills, but actually interpersonal skills. So the one-to-one communication situation, and also transcultural skills that to a certain extent we have to help our learners to get beyond the cultural stereotype. Please remember the individual is the enemy of the stereotype, and the videos that you find in our task on the wiki are exactly about that. So yes, I like this that we're already starting here with being very careful about how we word things. So Michael puts actually in Indians I met tend to speak more archaic, more archaic meanings of words. Yes, they use a different register of English, which is very often still linked to something before Britain left India or gave up India as a colony. Yeah, so not only words, but also patterns. So I mentioned intercultural. That's actually what we do between two cultures. Transcultural means beyond cultures. So it's actually the prefix, and interpersonal between two people. And that is also the kind of mix that we have to consider. Now, thinking about stereotypes, let us do a little exercise here, how to build awareness from the first start. So the Germans, the South Africans, and so on, exactly, because we have a huge group and we have a lot of different subcultures in Germany. But I want you to think about stereotypes. Hey, so think of Germany. Can you please put down what comes to your mind when you think of Germany? As this is my home culture, of course, we have to look into that first. Ordnung, yeah. So that's for those who don't speak German, it means order or orderliness. So we're pedantic, beer and sausages, yeah. Yes, we have a very peculiar way. Wurst, yeah. Okay, we're not very flexible, we're very serious. Oktoberfest, yeah. Law abiding. Yeah, Maria, let's not go into that, please. Yes. So, yes, we always beat the Brits at football, at least when it matters. Yeah, or at least the English. Okay, good. So I show you some pictures, and I think you were quite right. What I was missing actually was German engineering. So, yeah, but I think you got here the beer drinking football supporters. That is one of the typical cliches. And then you have this, I don't know if you know this, my husband actually posted this to me, chaos German style. And I hope you find a joke in this. And then, of course, we have the advertising for Audi, and there's the idea of German engineering. And Audi didn't even translate its own slogan into English. They went for Vorsprung durch Technik, and when the Brits tried to pronounce that, it was really funny. And that is also something that's supposedly us. So, yes, your car is German. Good. Yes, Evelyn, we call that chaos. So even though only one paperclip is the other way or the wrong way around. So, and that's it. Yes, I think Audi uses the same logo actually everywhere. And these are the stereotypes. And the stereotypes are to a certain extent true. And of course, we market that. We live very well on your belief in German quality or German orderliness or something like this, because people buy, for example, German pumps or cars because they think they're very reliable. And then you look at Volkswagen in the last couple of years and you think about that twice. But the question is, of course, to what extent are these stereotypes true? And to what extent can it actually hinder our communication with somebody from Germany when we think they're all into football and drive Audi cars? So, and that's exactly the point. And usually when I start teaching intercultural competence, this is one of the first activities. I take Germany, or for example, any other culture that the students have to deal with or are familiar with, but it's usually the best idea to start with the home culture of the learners to build awareness and think about the influencing factors. So elements that we need to teach then in, you may add your own ideas to the list, of course, in intercultural competence are, in my experience, these things. I think country briefings are important when people are seconded or assigned for a certain time to another country. It helps if you remember that in Britain, people drive on the right, on the left, and then you have to look right first so that you're not killed when you cross the street. But I think actually we have to focus a lot on communication styles. Then we have to think about expectations, what people expect. And that has to do with people's values, because that also influences the way they do business and they build relationships. We have to look into habits. This is what you said in the beginning. Culture is very often the way things are done by a specific group, which can be a professional group, for example, but it can also be a national or a regional group. And so habits would, for example, be that like IT guys in different countries very often have a specific professional culture. So do lawyers or doctors. And regional cultures are quite distinct, for example, in Germany. So a lot of people think of Oktoberfest and the Bavarian regional culture as a kind of representative of German culture. But if you go to places like my hometown or Hamburg, life is quite different there. So then we have, of course, misunderstandings. We have to look into this because that is, of course, one of the big disturbing factors. We have to teach our students to change sides, to take another perspective, so that they see the other side, that they can reflect more, because reflection and observation are key tools in intercultural competence. And we also have to include non-verbal communication. So, oh yes, the handshake. Oh, is that? Yeah. So, oh yes, Julie, I know which advertisement that is. German engineering for hair. I think that's the anti-dandruff shampoo. Yes, and for example, the handshake, which is also a form of non-verbal communication, works quite differently from country to country. So what we have to however, pay attention to is that we have to be very careful that we don't say the Germans behave like this, the Japanese behave like that, and so on, because then we're just reinforcing stereotypes, or just perpetuating stereotypes. What we have to do is we have to teach awareness. Michael mentioned earlier the onion model. I'm sorry, I don't have the slide of this here, but I will include this in the presentation, which will also be uploaded on the wiki, so you can have a look at the slides again, where I think about the factors of influence, and they're really like layers of culture and shape each and every one of us. And there are far more factors of influence than just, say, national culture or stereotypical behaviors. So, how does business English or English come into this? Well, I think you might be familiar with this. This is from David Gradio from English Next, where he looked into actually who uses English. And he looked at the tourism industry, but I would say that's in general quite true for all business. And he said, or he found out that using English internationally means to 3/4 these interactions are done between non-native speakers of English. So it's non-English to non-English speakers. So whose first language isn't English. English to other countries is then 12%, and the other way around would be then 10%. And I think that's quite important to remember that the huge amount of cultural background that comes into our use of English in international business, and that influences communication styles a lot. So then you may have also heard of Globish. If you don't know, there's a video on YouTube. If you just Google Jean-Paul Nerrière on Globish, you will find that, who suggests that we should actually do international English, business English with the 1,500 most common English words. We should keep simple sentence structures, and we should not tell idioms or jokes because people simply don't understand them without having the cultural background to this. So David Crystal, of course, that's also somebody who did a lot of research on this, and I think that's something that's quite important as well. So, okay. Now let's move into the problem with communication styles. If you're familiar with intercultural theory or intercultural studies, then you may have come across Fons Champernowne and Charles Hampton Turner's book, Riding the Waves of Culture. And they defined 3 communication styles, but again, they did this for national or supranational regions. So they said the Asians communicate like this, the Western Europeans communicate like this, and the South Americans communicate like this. And I was like, oh my God, how stereotypical could you possibly go? Yeah? And I took the model because I think there are different communication styles, but I adapted them and changed them to colors. The color coding is actually built on a profiling tool that I use a lot in intercultural training, which is the diversity icebreaker by a company called Human Factors. They're based in Norway, and they have a blue type, a red type, and a green type. And I usually align these 3 communication styles to sports. Could you please tell me, there's always the black speaker and then there's the colored speaker. Could you please tell me how you would interpret the first communication style? How long are the speaking lines? And how long are the pauses between the speaking lines? Can you put your ideas there? So how would you describe the first one? Very linear, clear turn taking. Actually more monologues. Maybe black has more power, but blue would come back. Yeah. So something like this. Mm-hmm. Good. And I usually think about that this is a bit like chess, you know, somebody makes a move, then you think about it, then you say something, and you don't interrupt, of course. Good. Compared to this, how would you describe the second style of communication? Yes, more interactive. Mm-hmm. What about the speaking bits? Jorge, I think that is the first one, right? There's a long speech. It's yeah, maybe not really overlapping, but the turn taking happens a lot quicker. Yeah, faster interaction, still turn taking, and they're actually shorter. So I think this is actually a bit like tennis. Yeah, so when you play the ball back and forth. No, they're not interrupting actually, but so I think that the pauses are definitely shorter than in the first one. Good. And how would you describe the third style? And believe me, that was the hardest to create in PowerPoint. Speaking without listening, yeah. So there's definitely kind of interrupting because green starts speaking before black has finished. Messy, unclear, lots of overlapping. Unstructured. It's also quite interesting because from the way you word your answers, I can already see which style you prefer. Because it seems that like the third one gets a lot of like negative wording here, yeah, so messy, chaotic, and so on. And of course, the speakers are digressing; they don't stick to one topic here, yeah. So lots of loops and backwards and forwards, and so on. Maybe yes, but Analia, I think you personally maybe don't, or at least not when you talk to like Western Europeans like me. And the funny thing is that actually in every nationality, in every country, you find these types of speakers. The first one is more somebody who's really into information, focused on facts. The second one is more focused on social interaction. And the third one is more focused on like brainstorming, great ideas, and so on. And I personally have to say that I can communicate like this um, or like in all three styles, depending on who am I talking to. Where would you think is the first style very useful? In what kind of situation does the first style make sense? Yeah, I think we have that in Greece as well. Yeah. Dylan, yes, most people have a preferred style, but as skilled communicators, you should be able to adapt and you should simply be able to accept that people talk in a certain way. And if you try to adapt more, then you can be more successful in communication, even though the third one is really challenging for a lot of people here. Yes. So negotiations, maybe manager to employee, yes. Also presentations and sometimes classroom teaching. Even though the presentation can get quite boring, but sometimes I have to explain in longer bits, yeah, what my students need to learn. Where would you see the second style most useful? Oh, sorry, the sports for three, Analia, is rugby. Yeah, so we have chess, tennis, and rugby. Because rugby looks also very chaotic and unstructured, but it isn't. Yeah, and it's actually a great sport. So, so it's a chess, tennis, and rugby if you want to use that. But again, the presentation will come up with the notes, and in the notes you have also the explanation or how to use things in the classroom. So back to number 2, telephone conversations, negotiations. Yes, if you have a time limit. Yeah. So information gap game, interview, something like this. Yes. So because the focus is really more on building a social relationship, can you think about where the third style would be useful? The third one is British Parliament. Yes, okay. Definitely not German Parliament, even though with the AfD that might change. Yeah. So where would you have that? Competition, maybe brainstorming. Yeah, could even be small talk because you do topic hopping or something like this. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, or even socializing activities. Yeah? So, and as I said earlier, as skilled communicators, you should be able to do all. So, for example, when I'm teaching, sometimes I have to do the first one. When I'm talking to my husband or to my friends, we go for the second one. But when I'm with the women in my family, we actually do the third one. We all talk on top of each other or over each other, sometimes about completely different things, but we have some kind of conversation going on. The men in the family quietly leave the room. No? So much to stereotypes, national stereotypes on communication styles. And you would actually have to learn to interact with all kinds of communication styles and to improve your own adaptation or adaptness to this. So another model that we use a lot is high and low context. I don't know if you're familiar with this. This is something that was coined by one of the founding fathers of cultural theory, Edward Hall, in the 1950s already. And this is something, of course, where my German students have a lot of difficulty with, because quite a few of them, I should mention also the engineers and accountants, tend to speak low context, so they tend to speak very directly, whereas the English colleagues often tend to speak very high context. But let's look at what that actually means. So we have two sentences here. And can you please do me a favor and do a word count? How many words are used in the blue sentence? How many are used in the purple sentence? And which words make actually up the message? Yes, exactly. Mandy mentioned high-low context. I think it was not only India, Germany, it was also something about the Brits. Yeah. Good. That's quite familiar. So 11 versus 5, exactly. Oh, sorry, Evelyn, it could be that maybe this is not displayed correctly. So I'll read the sentences out to you. We have one sentence which is actually, we were hoping to receive a slightly more substantial rebate, and another sentence that expresses the same thing but with fewer words. We want a bigger rebate. Where's the want hope rebate? Yeah. So how many words or which words make up the message in the left sentence, if you can see this? Dylan, I would possibly go for substantial rebate, but hope and receive are maybe not necessary, because the message is really more substantial rebate. So it's at the end of the sentence. And there are some indicators like receive or hoping, but they're actually not part of the message. They're leading to the message. In the second sentence, we have three words: want, bigger, rebate. So more or less the sentence is the message. And I love this because this is something that makes it very clear what the difficulty is. Now, you already started evaluating this by saying that the first one is more polite, and the second one may sound rude. And I strictly want you to think about this in different ways. Stop using things like polite versus rude when it comes to high and low context, because in my opinion, this is the wrong question. The question is clear communication. So can you tell me, please, which problem would the right speaker, the low context speaker, have with the high context speaker? What would be his or her problem? Yes, exactly, Evelyn. There are too many words. They wouldn't simply get the message because the message is not where the low context speaker expected, in the beginning of the sentence, or rather in the middle, but at the very end. So how do I resolve the problem? I teach my low context speakers, if they have a high context speaker, to listen what is said at the end of the sentence and to paraphrase that or to repeat that. Oh, so you wanted a more substantial rebate. Yeah? Because if you are very obscure in your message and you're not a clear communicator, you're rude as well. You're impolite because you're not considering the other person's needs. Yeah? So whereas the high context speaker would say the low context speaker is very direct and it's like a slap in the face. Exactly. Yeah? And it depends, Lalitha, exactly on who are you negotiating with. And my experience is that, for example, US Americans, if they are also more low context, rather like doing business with the Germans because they use the same kind of register of directness than with their English colleagues, who tend to be very high context and are always beating around about the bush. If you want an exercise on this, there's a great one, because this is actually from Mark Powell, his book New Business Matters, the course book. So it's something about what you say and what you think, diplomatic language, and that is a great one to use in a business English classroom. So, okay, so that is actually the problem that my students are facing. And we have to, and this is what Marjorie put there in the box, we have to think about a combination of the two. Yeah. So we have to think about something like medium context. Could we have a bigger rebate? Or we would expect a bigger rebate. Yeah. Putting some could or should or would in the front and being actually somewhere in the middle. So, and you mentioned already the idea of politeness, and I said you have to be very careful when you do dealing with this, because the problem is, what is the definition of politeness? And Rudi Kammerer phrased that very well in his book, which is about building intercultural competence as a business English teacher, that politeness is an agreement on the communication framework. What is polite for me is maybe not polite for you, and we have to discuss this. And this is where we come to your next task. So I spent, and you may hear that also from the accent, I spent a lot of time in Scotland. And about 20 years ago, me and my best friend in Scotland were communicating like this. So I was up visiting for a week. I spent a week in Glasgow, and then I contacted him and said, oh, so shall we meet on Tuesday? And his reply to this was, if you like. What is your interpretation of this? Did he really want to meet me on Tuesday? Yes, Michael, I agree with this. Like with politeness, not all business people have taken courses. And when my German students go for intercultural competence, their English colleagues actually don't. And that, if only one side is preparing, it doesn't always help. Doesn't want to, I doubt this. This is what he was thinking. But I work really long that day. I will be tired. On Wednesday would be better, but she wants to meet on Tuesday. So he didn't really, but he didn't tell me. He expected me to interpret his if you like as a no. Whereas I'm a kind of quite direct person. I'm low context. And I just didn't understand this, because I would have expected him to say no. As I said, that 20 years, that was 20 years ago. We're still friends. He's still my best friend in Scotland. How could we have resolved this? What could I have done differently, and what could he have done differently? Yes, Helle, exactly. Rephrase the question. So maybe I'm in Glasgow next week. When would you like to meet? When do you have time? Yeah, so leaving the option to him. Exactly, Natalie. Yeah, asking him. Yeah, good. Yes, Marjorie, spot on. Yeah, so maybe he could have said something like, oh, how about like not Tuesday, but another day. He could have made a different suggestion or something like this. Yeah. And you need actually clarifying language, and you need open questions, because if you start with shall we, this is actually quite manipulating. It doesn't leave really a lot of options to say no, and this was something I wasn't aware of. So it's really about likelihood, frequencies, thinking about situations, and getting people to reflect on communication styles as well. So the funny thing was then I was there 5 years ago when he had a lot of like personal trouble, and then I asked again, so I'm in Glasgow, can we meet up or something like this? And he said, you know, Saturday isn't so good because I'm not in, I have work to do. Can we meet on Wednesday? And then he said, actually, that was one of the nicest compliments I ever got. You know, it's so nice that I can just say no. Let's meet another day, and I don't have to beat around the bush, because you are actually low context and you accept a no. So we both learned to move. I learned to ask open questions, and he learned it's perfectly okay to say, no, that day isn't possible. How about another day? And this is, I think, of course, the ideal, that both sides move and learn about other communication styles. But as Michael put it earlier, not everybody is going through that kind of training or has that kind of reflection observation. But this is what I also mean by changing sides. Yeah, helping our students to step into somebody else's shoes and see things from a different perspective. So, and this is why communication and the use of language are actually great features in intercultural competence, and that helps you as business English trainers to think about how to integrate that. So we started with a high and low context language, and this is something that was originally published in The Telegraph by Alison Phillips. And it said what the Brits say, what the foreigners understand, but I changed that to what high context speakers say, what low context speakers understand, and what high context speakers mean. This is something that's related to the third task, but I wanted to give you already a kind of taste of this. So you have here a number of what high context speaker says, that's the green cards. So let's just take, that's not bad. That's card number 3 on the left. What do you think do the low context speakers understand? And what do the high context speakers mean with that's not bad? Eveline, if you can see the photo, it's a very light green. They're the cards on the left. Yes. So the low context speaker would actually understand that's poor or that's bad. And what does the high context speaker mean with this? Yeah. So the high context speaker, of course, means that's good. I would say that's not bad. Yeah. And it also depends, of course, on the tone, on the intonation, and something like this. Yeah. But it's the same when you say quite good means actually not the no context speaker would understand. Oh, it's quite good, where the high context speaker actually says that's not really good and that's a bit disappointing. No? So something like this. And this is a game you can download this as a worksheet. It's in the wiki. And then you can cut this up, laminate this if you like, and actually organize that as a game for your students. And believe me, when I play that with my students, this is one of the most revealing things to do. It's an eye opener because they really see like how things can be interpreted. So that's again a great tool for reflection. So that's the answer to the ones that we had. So also like, for example, with the greatest respect, where people think he's listening to me and instead they mean you're an idiot, more or less. So I think that's a great activity as well. So yes, please do so. So as I said, everything is in the wiki, and otherwise drop me a mail or notify me if you can't find something and upload this again. So another thing or another thing to include in intercultural training, where you can also start quite easily to build intercultural competence for yourself and your learners, is values. And this is again something that comes from a book on intercultural theory. And can I just ask you, what 3 values matter to you? Just put in the 3 values that matter most to you. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, Francesca, I understand honesty, respect, and tolerance, but could you please choose values from the list here, unless you can't see the list? So I think there seem to be some problems with that. So the funny thing is, when this was published, and people, then the authors of the book, limited the values on the left, or not limited, aligned the values on the left to Asian cultures and the value on the right to European cultures. And I said, this is also something I'd like to challenge, because family is important no matter where you're from. And what you put in, most of you actually, no matter where you are from, yeah, different cultures, different backgrounds, nearly everybody mentioned family. And I play this, I give students a card with a value on it, and they have to represent the value. And then I ask the other students to stand at a certain distance to the person. So for example, when it's attitude to time, Or hierarchy, people usually stand very far away from that person, but when it's family, they all huddle together, yeah, so it gets actually like a very, very dense cloud because it seems to be important to everyone. But if you start thinking about values or what matter to people, that also helps in avoiding misunderstandings or getting better results, for example, in meetings or in negotiations. So if you think about, for example, objections, why people complain, why people don't like something, then they do this because certain values are important to them. So in here we have 4 statements. Yeah, and you could think about what values matter to the speaker and what could you do then to convince the speaker. Yeah, so this hasn't got to do with language. This has got to do with meaning and interpreting meaning in a specific way. So if something isn't very customer friendly, then obviously we're really focused on the use for people. That's a value. Yeah? Then I doubt that we can finish the project on time. Of course, then timeliness is very important to that person. Quality is something, yeah, so perfectionism, yeah, something like this is very important. Or people are afraid of change, which is, well, we tried that before and it didn't work. And these kind of activities can also help to people to understand very quickly that language alone isn't enough. That's the way we use this. So. And then if you think about the value behind it, then you can also start teaching how to overcome a certain objection by using that value. So for example, if you say it's not possible, then people can go and ask what would make it possible. So for you, this would be very difficult. Or if we changed the time frame, would that help? So different strategies, but all would help, for example, to overcome a kind of blocker or a killer phrase, as we call them. And that's something where the understanding of values, what matters to the other person, can also help in conflict management, problem solving, and negotiations. And that is, for me, something that's communication and culture and influences business. And it's really the way you handle English and not just a linguistic problem. So, for example, I teach a lot of effective questioning. You mentioned open questions already. Yeah. So, which is a tool to overcome objections, but they're also reflexive questions, which first of all paraphrase what the other person said and therefore accept their opinion or how they feel about something. And you can go for a hypothetical question where you suggest as the kind of conditional, yeah, if we did that, would that help? You can suggest a solution and see how the other person reacts to this. Yeah, so, okay. Good. So to more or less round that up, it's quite a good thing to think about in your teaching how you can avoid cross-cultural pitfalls. So if an incident happens, we should always analyze if it's a personal thing, if it's a professional thing, is it cultural or is it communicative? And this is something which we will be looking at in task number 2 next week, which is critical incidents. And this incident, I was really thinking about looking at the Me Too debate that we're having at the moment, if I should delete this, but I said no, because this is a real life incident that happened. Yeah, and I know the parties involved, so I know this is more or less what happened. And the critical incidents worksheet you have is that you always have an incident with a number, and then you have other incidents without numbers, and there are 2 sides of the story, which is very important when you write critical incidents. And this is the first part of the story. So this is critical. So in our list, this is critical incident number 7. I hope you can all read this. If not, then I read this out to you. So let me know if you got any problems. Okay, good. That's good to know, Evelyn. Yeah. So, and this is one side of the story. This is the other side of the story. So, and the question that you have to ask here is, so they see this obviously as what? Where do they see the problem? Is it personal? Is it cultural? Is it professional? Or is it communicative? So yeah, so it's proximity, it's personal space. Yeah. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with the fingertip, the elbow, and the arm length culture, but in different cultures or different people have a different idea of personal space. So fingertips is something like 20 centimeters. Elbow or culture is something like 40 centimeters. This is why a lot of people hate being in an elevator, yeah, because their personal space is taken away. Yeah? And in Japan, for example, I learned that it's more like arm length, so you stand really like a meter away from each other, which for me would make it very difficult to talk because I feel like shouting or something like this. Analia, this is actually my incident. So the incidents, the critical incidents are in the incident worksheet. Yeah. So, and I actually have a follow up. Then I make my students line up and then ask them to get closer and to put their hand out like this when the other person gets too close to find out where their personal space is, because it's a very important thing in nonverbal communication. Yeah? And there are in total in the worksheet, there are 8 critical incidents, and I use them a lot because they're great for side changing. And your task will be to write up critical incidents. However, please be aware, critical incidents must always have both sides in a personal and an I narrative, so that you really get this kind of view how the other person feels. Yeah? And what I like here is actually this kind of mix. Yeah? Is it personal? Is it culture? And of course, you should think about how to resolve this misunderstanding. So what could the two people have done here? What could Sue or Roberto have done here to resolve this misunderstanding? Maybe they could have spoken about it. Yes, I know, Michael, exactly, because they have to allow space for bowing, which is what I usually demonstrate them with my students. Yeah, what happens if you stand too close together? You bang heads. Research about it, try to talk again. Yes, what I actually tell people if they have that problem that somebody gets too close is that they have to use their hands in front of them. So they should gesture a bit because they're bridging the space. So the other person doesn't feel you're standing too far away. But on the other hand, they are sort of like keeping people at distance in a nice and simple way. And sometimes solutions are really a non-verbal thing. Good. Yes, or maybe you actually start walking back, yeah, consider alternatives to explain behavior. It's very good, Pete, because they're very fixed in their interpretations. Yeah. Oh, she is very English. Oh, he's so typically Italian. So instead of resolving this personal space issue, they just blame it on culture. Yeah? Which is what we usually do. And when you start taking this critical incident apart, you see it isn't just a cultural thing. It's actually a mix of different influence factors. Yeah? So, okay, good. Now, so we talked about this already. Another thing is actually listening. We talked about paraphrasing and rewording. This is something Julie mentioned in very early on in the discussion. This is something that we need to do because resolving misunderstandings really helps if you check again if you understood something correctly. Yeah. And if you use paraphrasing, then the other person can say yes or no. So if it's a no, then they have to resolve it. If it's a yes, you understood correctly, and then you can go on. Yeah, so this is also something which is a communicative strategy to improve intercultural, cross-cultural communication. Another game that I do is actually, I think that's also from New Insights into Business. The original case was Japan, but I changed this, of course, to Germany, was thinking about what business advice you would give or people should give about their own culture. Yeah, so like greetings, for example, the handshake, the mad German handshake. Germans love to shake hands. Stereotype, I know. Use of names, rank and hierarchy, timekeeping, agenda in a meeting, and so on. And this is something that's very interesting because people start reflecting about it and they find out that things are changing. Handshake, the use of handshake in Germany is changing. Timekeeping is changing. Yeah, so I think that's also something that's Very, very important. Yes. And that goes hand in hand with empathic listening, exactly. So, for example, small talk. Now, you can't just tell the Germans you have to do small talk. Now, if they don't want to. So what I actually teach my German engineers or accountants who are very low context and don't see the point of using small talk in business, that I say it's a strategic thing. Yeah, it helps you to understand other people's English. It helps you to understand communication styles. You can check wavelengths. It's a warm up to help your brain producing English, and it helps you to build relationship. So, and I also use a lot of this in presentation training, where I say, for example, an audience in a presentation, this is again the diversity icebreaker, can have different values. Yeah. So there are people who are people focused. They're the nice guys. They smile at you. They're very supportive listeners. Then you have people who are vision focused. They want you to entertain, to have flashy animations and present something new. And then you have people who are information focused, who are very focused on details and facts and so on. And then I ask my students, what body language would you expect? Yeah, or what questions would you expect from the people? Yeah. Yes, Michael, if you go for the original profiling tool, there's something like 84 points, and in my score, I was 27 green, 27 blue, and 30 red, which makes me a great teacher because it just means I can talk to everybody. Not just go on the Diversity Icebreaker website; it's a great tool. Yeah. But for example, an issue we have very often is questions in a presentation. What happens if the audience asks no questions? How do you feel as a presenter? Yeah. So, and that is maybe not why the audience does it. So you may think they didn't understand me, they didn't like it, they didn't like me. Yeah? Your audience may think questions are a kind of criticism and lack of respect, or we need time to process what you've just told us, or hierarchy. Only the boss is allowed to ask questions. Yeah. So, and that is also something. Yeah, maybe we don't call it small talk. Social lubrication is a nice one. Yeah. Again, body language. This is HSBC. This is also something that comes up in the videos. When you have this, whoa, where's my camera? This gesture, it means different things in different cultures. So of course we teach our business students not to use certain gestures in a presentation, in a meeting, because they can be easily misunderstood. Yeah. So for example, what would you think? What's your interpretation of this? Is this a clear gesture? So, okay, yeah, you have that in a culture club. Mudra, what's that? 0? Yeah, perfect. Yeah, so, okay. And this is what it means. In Indonesia, it means money. In Brazil, correct me if I'm wrong, yeah, it means get lost. In the Philippines, it means you're nothing, 0, yeah. And in Italy, it means you're an idiot or something worse. There's a nice video actually on this, also on YouTube. And that depends on the country and also on the culture. Yeah? So you also mentioned emails, and this is, I think, the last case study before we talk about the next step. So it should take another 5 minutes. For example, emails, again, high-low context. So this is an original email that one of my students sent. Yeah? And she didn't understand why she never heard from that person again. So why do you think was there the deadly silence at the other end? Oh, thank you, Lalita. Going Dutch in Beijing by Mark McCrum. Okay. Yeah. So exactly, it was actually too rude. And you know what her comment was? But I used please. And I said, well, you know, please doesn't make it polite. Yeah. So there's a lot of pressure building. It's not very appreciative of the person that you want to do something for you. Yeah. So then it's a command, send me. Yeah? It's really urgent, pressure building, and so on. And then we think about strategies to rewrite the email. So I use this usually as a rewriting exercise. There's actually a kind of sound file connected to this where the conflict escalates because Natalie rings Andy up and they're having an argument on the phone, but I can't play that here for some reason. And exactly, and then I asked them to rewrite, and this would be, for example, a model of the rewritten email. Yeah, I know you're very busy, appreciating that the other person has work to do as well. I cannot finish our part, so could you please send me the figures? So giving a reason, yeah, something like this. So, and just by changing the tone and the wording, and this is not more difficult English, even though it's slightly longer, you might actually be more successful, unless the other person is a deadline killer. These people exist too. And this is something, I think Marjorie mentioned that earlier, I tried to use a middle way between high and low context. And this is something that would maybe be more medium context, so it's very clear. That doesn't use too many words, but on the other hand, it is also polite enough so not to offend the other person, and I think it's also empathic as well. Good. So this is basically some things you can do, how you can start building your own intercultural competence or develop it more, and these are also activities you can use in the classroom. So if you have any questions, put them in the chat box and I will give it another 5 minutes. But before we do that, I would actually like to explain what we do. So we'll post task 1 on the wiki, which will be done in week 2 with Kirsten Waechter. I think that's the folder. Yes. Oh, thank you. Yes, Vicky Hollett's videos are great. So I want you to choose one of the video and analyze it. There's a list of videos in the link list. What is the cultural misunderstanding? How could this have been avoided? And I want you to put those comments, not the full analysis, those comments actually on the Google Plus discussion forum. What I would also like you to do, because I was very impressed with the first week and with how many ideas were actually provided by the participants of the course and things that I never heard about or I never used. I was like, my God, I'm learning a lot here. If you know other videos that work like this, post the links. I will actually collect them and they go into the intercultural resource package that we also provide at the end and that we will be looking at next Saturday. So task 2, which is the critical incidents task, will come up then in week on Tuesday, and task 3, which is about the high-low context and game activities, will come up on Thursday. So, and our wrap-up session will be on Saturday, the 11th of February. And this will also include a Q&A on the activities, but we will also be giving some information about courses, other materials, where you can go, what you can do if you want more input on intercultural competence. And that's something I think that's also quite important to have a look at. But first, I want you really to start developing some ideas and thinking about some things yourself. Good. Sue, do we have a time for next Saturday? Can you please put a time in the chat box? I mean, that will also be, of course, on the wiki. Not yet. Okay, so then follow the wiki and the discussion. So we'll put out the link and the time as soon as we know it. Okay, so if you have any, so there don't seem to be any questions because you already put in all the kind of thank you. Yes, well, thank you. Okay, the wiki is posted on, oh God, so the wiki is posted on the PB Works, and that is something, if you go to week 2, there is a discussion link which takes you to the material. So just go on the Google Plus, Analia, and then you find the link to the wiki there. Yeah, no questions. I don't feel offended. It's not that you didn't understand me, you didn't like me, Pete. No worries. Yeah, so that's exactly. Thank you very much, Chris. So you have the link for the BESIG EVO 28 PB Works, 2018 PB Works. That's the link for the wiki where you find the tasks, and your comments go, of course, in the discussion on Google Plus. Okay. I'm really looking forward to this. I'm sure I'm learning a lot from you. I will have another look at the presentation, which will be uploaded, and I will also go through the chat again. And if I see useful ideas and comments, then I will also copy that and put that into the presentation for next week, and also maybe write up a kind of summary. So Okay, then thank you very much.